Hi there, my name is Matt Vlasach. I'm VP of Product and Solutions Engineering here at Jamf. I'm very excited to talk to you today about Mac in 2026, Secure by Design meets the enterprise. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, thank you so much for attending. Glad you could make the time and join me today. Second, there's going to be a lot that we cover, but don't worry, we're going to be recording this, and we'll be emailing you the recording later. So if there are things that you missed, you can come back to it and review those details. And feel free to ask Q&A throughout. We're going to be answering some questions during and after the session, so please use the Q&A feature of the webinar here, and we'll take your questions as we go. If we miss them, we'll make sure to get back to you after the session. Okay, well, without any further ado, look, it's a very exciting time to be working with Macs in the enterprise. There's a couple factors coming into play that is really driving a lot of interesting and growth of Apple in the enterprise space. So one is the aggressive price point. We're seeing the MacBook Air, M4 particularly, and now the M5 over time, will really drive a price to performance ratio that we just haven't seen with an Apple device in quite some time. And what that's going to do is that's really going to help open up Apple devices to more personas within the enterprise. Now, we've also seen some great vertically integrated hardware and software provided by Apple in the last couple of years. We're going to be talking a lot about that today. There's also been a decrease in what we've called the app gap that has existed for a long time, with apps moving more to web browsers or even native Apple app experiences. We're not seeing that same problem that we've had for the decades in the past where you just didn't have critical enterprise applications runnable on Mac. We're definitely seeing that change. And last but not least, we're still continuing to see a very strong end user demand for the device. You see new employees joining the workforce that are used to Apple devices, and giving them the choice to pick the endpoint that it makes them most productive is something that a lot of companies are focused on when they're looking at a user-centric IT environment. Now, when it comes to choice, you obviously have two main choices within the organization and the enterprise. There's Windows and there's Macs. Now, I'm going to do a little comparison here, not for the sake of being able to compare one to the other, but just to call out some very important fundamental differences between the two operating systems that really are at the heart of this discussion today. So first of all, let's explore the characteristic of design priority. When Microsoft Windows is developed by Microsoft, they are focused on compatibility and utility. Whereas on the macOS side, the focus really is on cohesive experiences. Now, those two things are not necessarily at odds with each other, but they talk to a different persona, which is the second bit here. That compatibility and utility is really great for that IT administrator or InfoSec team that really wants to be able to pick whatever they want and do things however they want and have those tools work for a very long time is the priority that you generally see on the Windows side. Where for macOS, Apple's main end user and main customer is the end user. They care about that Apple experience a lot. And the challenge has been, how do you bring IT and InfoSec into the fold of an experience designed for the end user and not create, but still be able to provide those critical enterprise capabilities that those teams need. Now, when it comes to ecosystem, on the Windows side is very extensive. It's open. On macOS, because there's so much focus on cohesive experiences and end users, it's a very focused and opinionated ecosystem. You don't have infinite combinations of hardware peripherals and drivers, and even OEMs don't exist on macOS. It's all Mac, Apple's created hardware with a few different form factors that Apple decides to put out. Now, all of this drives towards a security model of how you keep those two universes secure. On the Windows side, it's through secure by configuration. You have all that extensibility, all that optionality. You need to configure your way to security by being able to build your security stack the way that is exactly right for your organization. Whereas on the Apple side, secure by design means that Apple is taking an opinionated and focused approach to how they deal with security, and they bake it right into the operating system. And we're going to spend a lot of our time today talking about these secure by design principles and paradigms that Apple has built into their operating system and how you could extend those into the enterprise. Now, to that end, whether it's secure by configuration or secure by design, it doesn't matter. These devices need to be more than managed. Any endpoint that is suitable for company data and being used in the enterprise has to meet these 5 characteristics. They need to be compliant. You have to have good visibility and auditability controls on them. You have to have attestation to make sure that there's genuine hardware. You have to have strong identity in a world of cyber attacks. And you have to have connectivity that is seamless, because work is not just within the 4 walls of the office anymore. You have a lot of different connectivity use cases that just have to be able to work for that endpoint to be a productive part of your IT stack. So, as I mentioned, Apple devices are secure by design. Now, what we try to do here at Jamf is we are trying to make those devices secure at scale by adopting secure by design paradigms. Now, what that translates to at the end of the day is it keeps a Mac working like a Mac. The reason why end users want to use a Mac at work is because of that experience. And if you fight against those frameworks and fight against that experience by trying to configure your way and treat a Mac like you have a Windows device, it's going to not result in that great experience that is driving the very demand for the endpoint in the first place. Now, we're able to do that, and Apple's providing the mechanisms to do this through native OS frameworks, which ultimately reduce third-party agents that remain in conflict, take up precious CPU cycles, and otherwise would draw down the capabilities of the Mac. Now, Apple has a lot of security features that are built right in. So out of the box, you get software updates that are just really mature and designed and constantly updated from Apple. You have the App Store, which is the curated collection and vetted application binaries. You have things like Gatekeeper, which is notarization controls to make sure that only authorized developers and properly code-signed software can run on the Mac. You have XProtect, which is an Apple threat intelligence team that looks for compromised developer accounts and is able to quickly and effectively prevent those applications from that malicious developer from running on any of their fleets of Macs in the world. You have memory integrity enforcement, which is a really cool new addition as of this year to modern devices, which helps look for buffer overflows in memory from the operating system with C language level pointers that that eliminates a whole class of traditional buffer overflows that lead to advanced exploits. You have File Vault, which is built-in whole disk encryption. And of course, the operating system itself has things like secure boot, system integrity protection, assigned system volume. All of these things are just baked in when you unbox a Mac, whether it's for enterprise or for consumer use, to make sure that that endpoint is running vetted software from Apple and is not able to be easily compromised by bad actors. Now, that is what is baked into the experience, and this is where we start to get into how the secure by design philosophy extends into the enterprise. Now, we've been doing this with Jamf, and every MDM out there has been doing this for quite some time, where we are leveraging native frameworks that Apple provides for device management to accomplish some of these key things. So like you see here. So app lifecycle and patching, deploying configurations and policies, managing those OS updates, and helping with zero-touch out-of-the-box provisioning. Now, these are native Apple APIs that are that ship with the operating system, and an MDM vendor like Jamf will integrate against. Now, what Apple's been doing is they've been extending that pattern to more parts of the InfoSec and IT stack. It's no longer just endpoint management, but they're getting into the world of identity, networking, and security. And they're doing it in a secure by design way, where they're creating these frameworks that are built with an opinionated, focused design that are best with their operating system to achieve the outcomes and use cases that enterprises need. But here's the catch. All of those things are disabled by default until you have a service or until you have a service that is able to activate them and use them in the right way. Now, that is what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time we have here. So it really is how you get this secure by design in action within your enterprise. Now, we're going to cover those 5 different characteristics we covered at the beginning, and we're going to go through each of those in turn and showcase how Apple's secure by design architecture can help deliver the outcomes that are required for an enterprise-grade endpoint being a Mac device. So we're going to start with compliance. So compliance allows you to easily define, deploy, and audit industry-accepted security best practices. So from a secure design by design principle, what Apple's done is they've created native OS level configuration controls that can help you achieve those compliance requirements. They are silently deployed via device management, so the user doesn't have to do anything. There's no third-party software that has to be installed to cover most of those controls. You have built-in end-user tamper resistance. Apple's built a lot of capabilities to make it so that even as a root user, you are not able to tamper with or manipulate some of these configurations, and we'll take a look at those in a minute. But at the same time, because Apple cares so much about that experience, is policy transparency. They show what the configurations are that have been set by the end user in most cases, and shows that you can't change them because they're enforced by your admin. Again, we'll take a look at that in a bit. And then finally, it's integrated with a lot of open source macOS security compliance project benchmarks that are designed by big security agencies that outline what good looks like when it comes to defining a proper security baseline for your Macs. Now, to that end, Jamf has implemented all of these different benchmarks and frameworks. We make it really easy that if an organization needs to adhere to CIS, NIST, CNSSI, or the other sort of compliance frameworks, we make it very easy to go in, specify the benchmark that you need to work against. Now, what that does is that will automatically use configuration profiles, scripts, policies, other sort of things that are core to the Apple's frameworks and stack to be able to apply those configuration controls at scale across your fleet extremely reliably. So here you could see some of those configurations that are available from a rule perspective. Now, we also provide all the auditing documentation for this. So we actually will allow you to export the controls that have been set across your environment. We allow you to monitor the efficacy of these controls and report on that as well. It is something incredibly important for compliance and audit teams to make sure that an endpoint is secure for cybersecurity insurance claims and all those other sort of things. Having this as a baseline is incredibly important as a starting point for any endpoint, let alone a Mac. Now, one of the most important things, and it showed there in one of those controls, is actually software updates. On a Mac, one of the most important things you could do is just run the latest OS, because that's where the vulnerabilities that are most widely known and have been published are taken care of. So we've introduced this year a capability of what we call a set and forget software update. It is where we will monitor Apple's latest OS version updates, and you simply specify how many days after that update that update must be installed across your selected fleet of devices. And what we do is in setting this up, there's a series of notifications that will allow the user to update on their own accord in that time frame that are native notifications from the operating system that are effectively counting down to this day and time. And then once that happens, poof, the device is updated and your fleet is running the latest OS versions. Now, as far as transparency, for example, on those software updates, you can see that these switches are actually disabled and that the configuration, the settings here have been configured by a profile. It's telling the user very clearly if they go into the same settings view that they would go into on their personal Mac computer, they will see these are being managed by the organization. You can see in the background there in the top here that on my machine, we see that Macs are managed by Jamf software. But things like firewall configurations and some of those other controls that are set up by those baselines, they are transparently depicted here, and the end user knows that they are not able to modify that configuration. Now, one of the really neat things that Apple has done recently has recognizing that it's a Debian or Linux-based operating system. Not everything happens in the Finder UI. There is a terminal that can allow users to get pretty low-level access. And that includes shells and different daemons that are running on the device for either developers or just for other Linux type of runtime environments. Apple's provided a super low-level way to control those configurations at scale in a way that's completely tamper-resistant. So you can configure configuration files for all these different services you see here, push them through MDM, and deploy those configurations on a part of the operating system that cannot be touched by an end user. So for example, if you have a fleet of users that should never be doing sudo brew install, which is installing some developer tools, you can actually push one of these configurations down, and it will actually prevent the user from being able to execute certain commands at the shell. And of course, you can build workflows to allow for exceptions and scope to different departments who should be able to do this. But the point being is Apple's provided this incredibly low-level mechanism that allows you to prevent fundamental misuse of some of these really low-level tools that are built into the operating system, which, again, this is a secure by design decision that Apple has made within their operating system. So that's compliance. It is out-of-the-box compliance with industry standards, making sure that you're able to enforce those standards via the OS and through any third-party agent like the Jamf agent, and then having policy transparency without impacting user experience. These are all secure by design principles that Apple has taken, and we, and as well as others in the industry, are running with. Next up, attestation. I'm very excited about attestation as a technology. It's some pretty cool stuff. There's sessions out there if you want to really nerd out and go deep on this, but we'll keep it pretty light here for today. So what is it? It is cryptographic assurance of device hardware authenticity and unique persistent identifier. So what does that mean? From a secure by design scenario and what Apple's trying to do, they're making it just simply easy to identify a trusted device that belongs to your organization and disambiguate that from a non-trusted device that may be spoofing or attempting to look like a trusted device. This is a cryptographic method to prevent that sort of attack from happening. It also gives you vendor-issued, in this case, Apple-issued and assured device identifiers, such as the serial number or UDID. You have cryptographic evidence from the endpoint that it actually possesses those identifiers. You're not trusting some system along the way to have not been intercepted and tell you otherwise. You eliminate a whole class of attack surface of threats and attack surface by eliminating the ability to extract private keys from a Mac device. And this is using a secure enclave on Windows. It's known as a TPM that is able to keep that private key locked on the device. We'll talk about that more in a second. It allows you to identify tampered Apple hardware and software. Thanks to some integrations, again, with our deep frameworks and secure by design, there's a continuous evaluation that is able to happen with device management services to make sure that something weird hasn't happened with that hardware. If it, say, got stolen or manipulated or some characteristic of the device has changed, like system integrity protection has been disabled, that actually can be reported to your MDM service over time. And again, a cryptographically backed way that an attacker can't spoof. And finally, it significantly reduces PKI complexity for things like certificates for Wi-Fi and whatnot. We'll get into that in a second. So all of this attestation service is delivered through something incredibly cool called Apple Managed Device Attestation. Now, this is a trinity of capabilities spanning the manufacturing process from Apple to the hardware that they create to device management services such as Jamf. And those three elements work together to create a very high assurance of a device's identity and its genuine nature. Now, managed device attestation is rooted in a couple things. Like I mentioned, it's built in the manufacturing and supply chain process, but on the endpoint, private keys that are used when that device is first created, they're hardware bound, meaning they're not accessible or exportable. You simply cannot get them. The device is running a little mini OS called SEOS for the Secure Enclave that only does private key operations, and it's completely separate from the main operating system. So it's extremely well hardened, and there's no known exploits or ways to get those private keys off of those devices. You also get, thanks to that, the Apple services involved here, properties that are attested by Apple's services. So the serial number, the UDID, and also some of those other properties like is secure boot enabled, is system integrity protection disabled or enabled. You also can use managed device attestation with client certificates using the ACME certificate payload. We're going to dive into this right now. And this allows you to use this high assurance device identity for things like Wi-Fi and VPN and other sort of services, but using that, all that's natively built into the operating system. So for instance, say you want to set up Wi-Fi using ACME. Instead of a SCEP certificate or some other certificate, you would have your identity or your certificate authority or PKI provider that supports ACME device attestation certificates. You would set that up here in Jamf Pro. But crucially, you would specify these couple things here. You would say that hardware bound, that's a private key, is bound to the device. You can't get rid of it. You cannot come off of that. It's bound in the hardware. This is that vertical integration between software, hardware, and device management to make all this work. You have that device attestation service to make sure that the key that the certificate that's being generated is only going to be able to be generated if you get the proper attestation back from Apple. And then finally, key is extractable, similar to hardware bound, saying, no, this key is not going anywhere off this device. So it's simply, that private key is simply non-transferable, even if you have advanced root access to the endpoint. And then you set up a Wi-Fi certificate payload, for instance, where you would specify TLS as your certificate type. And here you could see I've referenced the ACME certificate as the identity certificate. Now that gets pushed down to the device. As soon as the device sees that, it will go there. And we'll actually walk through that in a moment here. On the device, you see that certificate has been pushed down with a hardware-bound key set to yes. So you have clear transparency that this has been set up and that the certificate is on the device with a hardware-bound key. Now, how would this work in an enterprise Wi-Fi space? I'm personally excited about this one because Wi-Fi is such a pain to get going with certificates, and ACME dramatically simplifies that when you're using managed device attestation. So? How does it work? You have device management service here on the left. You've got Wi-Fi and Ethernet, anything that's using 802.1x. And then you have an ACME device attestation certificate authority kind of there in the middle. Now, as you saw, you push an ACME cert request. What happens is that ACME CA, it actually will validate, what comes with that cert request is a assertion from Apple saying like, hey, I attest to these properties of this device. The ACME CA validates that with Apple and says, okay, yep, that all cryptographically checks out. I'm going to do one more thing, which is actually make sure that that device is with those identifiers are actually in your device management instance. So those devices, that device with serial number 1234 actually is a properly registered device in Jamf Pro with serial number 1234. If and only if that happens, then we install the certificate via MDM, just like any other X509 certificate, and we attach that, in this case, to a Wi-Fi configuration. Now, what happens is just like any certificate today, that certificate will be sent over to the network using 802.1x to a cloud radius server where PKI trust happens. This is all very standard, has been around forever. It's on Windows, it's on Mac today. But the whole point is you have that attestation loop that is involved with these certificates that allows you to use this strong device attestation to dramatically simplify how you get a certificate and verify that that device's integrity before issuing that cert to the device, and then checking it along the way. So that is attestation. It is cryptographic hardware and identifier validation provided through that kind of trinity of capabilities of the hardware, of the Apple hardware, software, and device management stack. It vastly simplifies certificate-based Wi-Fi and anything using 802.1x. And it really just establishes a zero trust foundation for Mac endpoints. If you cannot trust a certificate if you cannot trust the properties of a certificate used to issue, used for a device, and all of your higher level features and infrastructure is dependent upon the integrity of that certificate, all bets are off on a zero trust foundation. With managed device attestation, you've completely changed that game, and you now have very high assurance of that device's identity on the endpoint. Speaking of identity, let's pivot a little bit to user identity. So attestation really is around device. Let's look at the user in this context. So we want to establish and maintain high assurance end user identity with a consumer simple experience. So Apple's Secure by Design capabilities extend in these ways. So it provides macOS native phishing resistance on macOS. Just like we use the Secure Enclave for managed device attestation, you're using the Secure Enclave to securely store identity tokens for the end user on Macs as well. You have a built-in biometric hardware authenticator, also known as Touch ID. That is already burned in on the device, and it is something users are used to using. And it is a very strong authenticator that is also using the Secure Enclave. it's integrating SSO at the OS and app level. And we'll talk about that in a bit, where again, you're not just thinking about login to the Mac, you're thinking about login to applications in the web and other native apps. They built it for a new native out-of-the-box identity provider onboarding process. So you don't have to set your users on a journey to go figure out how to get their device and their user identity established. That is just laid out for them as part of device onboarding. And then finally, they've added a lot of certificate pinning and security capabilities to make sure that only authorized identity providers can use some of these frameworks to prevent misuse or unauthorized access and attacks to that identity plane. So Apple has introduced something called Platform Single Sign-On, which is the framework that really provides this kind of Apple native end-to-end phishing-resistant authentication that spans from the moment the device is unboxed through enrollment, through login processes at the screensaver and device unlock, as well as all the way through your logins to different applications. And it's all tied together in a unified way. So how does this work? When you first activate Platform SSO, either through an unboxing process or when you're at the desktop, a device registration event happens with the identity provider. Now, we're actually using what's available is the device attestation kind of certificate to provide that same level of device assurance to the identity provider that they have a very high, so to give them high assurance that they can trust this device that's coming in to register. Now, the IDP can challenge the user for authentication. That's usually username, password, or in a passwordless environment, a FIDO key or passkey. All of that is supported during this onboarding process. Now that you've registered that device and you've authenticated yourself, you now have a private key and public key pair that is registered on the device that is bound behind the Secure Enclave and Touch ID. So now when I try to go log into an application after I unlock my Mac, I unlock that key. And if I try to log into an app, that key is validated with the identity provider and say, hey, am I still allowed to access this app I'm trying to get to? Am I still even a valid user anymore? If the answer is yes, there's a challenge response process to make sure that that device actually is who it says it is. Some WebAuthn flows there is one of the mechanisms that could be used. That then ultimately allows a key to come back to the device to be exchanged and used when logging into an app. So during the onboarding process, the user sees something like this. They unbox their Mac. It says, welcome to Mac OS, choose your Wi-Fi. It automatically starts enrolling into management. And then you see something like this, which is a single sign-on for Mac experience. And that gets you through the onboarding and registration as we saw there. So that as soon as you get to the desktop and you open up a browser, Chrome, native app, or whatever, you have this seamless experience where all you do is just do your Touch ID again and you're in. You don't have to do any more passwords. You don't have to log in. No multi-factor push to your phone. Biometric Touch ID. Now, if you've set it up for certain applications, you can even get to a point where the moment you unlock your Mac, that's all you need to do. You don't even need to do Touch ID again. So it's really getting optimized in that way. Right. So lots more to cover on strong identity, but for today, that's the big pieces of it. So with strong identity, it's OS native phishing resistant authentication. Passwords are the worst. This is a way to get away from passwords in an enterprise state to keep your logins secure. You leverage built-in, intuitive, and private biometrics. You're able to use built-in hardware authenticators to eliminate the potential need to have these other third-party tool authenticators that cost additional money when you actually have it all built into your hardware that you're shipping with a Mac. And then finally, secure SSO onboarding during initial device setup. New in macOS Tahoe, it is truly a game changer when it comes to being able to log in, get a device onboarded, and then have a seamless single sign-on experience from there. I would highly recommend checking out jamf.it/PSSO for more details about how to set that up, the state of vendor readiness and support on the IDP side. It's a great resource. Once again, that's jamf.it/PSSO. All right, next up, visibility and audit. Now, visibility and audit, it allows you to effortlessly collect system and user events and stream them to a SIM or data lake of choice. Now, this is really important because there's a lot of gaps that are left when it comes to visibility on Mac devices. It's one of the main things I hear that holds Mac growth back is how do I know what's actually happening on this device? Now, Apple's built a high-performance eventing framework that's built right into the operating system. Now, it's an extensive library of events that we don't even have time to go through all of them today and list them off. It is a wide range from user to network to app to process, very extensive for deep analytics for your security teams to be able to understand exactly what's going on your Macs at scale. Now, it's using an extension architecture that is kernel safe. So if there's some issue with a vendor that has adopted this library, it will never result in any sort of major crashes or events on those Mac endpoints. And finally, built into the operating system, thanks to some of those built-in capabilities, is notarization and entitlements that limits the use of these frameworks only to authorized developers. So third-party malware, for instance, can't all of a sudden siphon a lot of very sensitive information off of that device. Now, on Mac OS devices today, there's a couple frameworks that I mentioned: Endpoint Security API, Unified Logging, Network Extension. These are all frameworks that the OS that Apple's designed into their operating system that emits all these events that a security vendor will want to know to understand, well, what's going on this device? But that amounts to gigabytes of events per day per device. It's an incredibly chatty set of information that just there's no way you could get that off the device, let alone pay for the cost of that. So what's happened is a lot of the EDRs out there, such as Defender, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, they've actually built plugins to pull in that information and ingest that information, whittle it down to the stuff they need, do their proprietary analysis, package up this resulting signal, and send it off to their EDR backend, where a security admin is able to evaluate what's going on their Macs right next to all their PCs. It's wonderful for the single pane of glass that security teams need, and is exactly why they go with Defender, CrowdStrike, or SentinelOne. However, only select eventing actually ends up in the SIM, and there's a lot of stuff that is useful for a lot of organizations, a lot of data and insight from those endpoints that are just thrown away on that first event ingestion piece, let alone, if it's not thrown away, conveyed in a way that could be flexibly sent to your SIM. So this is where Jamf comes in here with a telemetry agent that is able to tap off of the remaining bit, where you're able to take exactly the events you want. We will format and translate it into a common format that is suitable for transmission, but also suitable for consumption within your SIM or BI tool. And we whittle that gigabytes of events down to megabytes. Now that allows your security team, but also your Mac admin IT team, to have some really interesting insights about what's happening on that endpoint that may otherwise have been filtered out through your EDR or XDR agent. So what are some of the things you can get through these eventing events, through this eventing service that Apple provided? So you can see when the system booted, who logged in, exactly what user, USB events, like putting on the unencrypted USB, script events that were blocked by some security tools, privilege escalation, usage of the terminal and sudo commands, usage of a suspicious curl event, doing a gatekeeper override, which is one of those native Apple controls, bypassing other configurations, seeing that there's networking connectivity to unauthorized reports. You're able to get all this information in a time sequence format so you could go back and understand what's going on. Then you could respond with things like quarantine networking traffic, lock device password, invalidate Okta and access tokens. You could take an action using Jamf's platform, using another third-party platform, or using your other security tooling based upon that information that comes into your SIM directly from the endpoint. Now, when it comes to the categories, it's extensive. Like I mentioned, these are some of the categories you can easily configure of what data you want to get. It also includes diagnostic and crash reports, as well as performance metrics, which can really help you understand what's happening on those endpoints at scale. There's easy integrations to Microsoft Sentinel. So if you're a Sentinel shop, you're able to configure that really easily to get these events in there. But if you're not, we also have plugins and integrations with other popular providers using HTTP, syslog, Kafka, or even a local log file that you could pull off in your own customized way. Now this shows up in your backend tool, much like this, where you have nice clean JSON with those events that are easily readable and parsable. And then within your tool, you could actually build alerts for things like an unauthorized privilege escalation or unauthorized account creation, things that maybe unique Mac experiences that maybe haven't been caught by or configured within your or even available within your existing EDR tool, but you could kind of close those gaps with the full picture of what's happening on the Mac with these event outputs. So that's visibility and audit. Closing those visibility gaps for Macs in the SOC so that the Macs can sit and exist right next to those Windows devices in your security operations center, so Macs are not considered a black hole of understanding what's happening. They're using native frameworks that minimize performance impact and minimizes kernel panics through its extension-based architecture. And then it's flexible enough with all that richness of data to cover security and device health use cases that your organization may have. All right, last but not least, connectivity. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's no more four walls of organizations. You need to enable performant and secure from anywhere network connectivity, and Apple's very much been focused on this over the last couple of years. Now, they've done this in a couple ways with their secure by design architecture. One is a comprehensive network extension framework. This provides kernel-safe extensions for networking that allows third parties to build VPNs, filters, DNS solutions, proxies. All those fancy things that an enterprise needs can be done using this framework. Now, what's really exciting, we'll talk about a little bit here, is Apple's even gone one step further to build in some really modern networking protocols directly into the operating system that makes it so you don't need an app or even a user login to be able to get private networking set up. There's also device attestation we talked about that you could use for this network and authentication. Again, whether it's VPN that's built in or a third-party tool, that is all stuff that is tied together on the Apple framework side. And then for user identity, the whole idea is you can tie all this together with single sign-on and platform SSO. So you have networking connectivity through network extension, but then when it comes to simple user authentication experiences, you're just using Touch ID or some of those platform SSO features to quickly get into apps and get security out of the way for end users. Now, the Apple Network Relay Framework is something Apple's been working on in the last few years, and is a big evolution for the Apple platform. Most importantly, what it does, a few characteristics, it's zero touch and agentless. The agent to be able to run this powerful new networking framework is shipping with every Mac OS device. It's already built in. It just needs to be activated. It's using modern networking protocols like HTTP3 and QUIC. So it's ultra fast and it's compatible with a lot of firewalls, unlike a lot of other VPNs that, work over different ports and have a lot of challenges in different environments. It interoperates with other VPNs. So you could have an evolution to supporting a network relay strategy without having to rip out your existing VPN strategy. And then it has strong device authentication support behind it. So how does this kind of work and hold together? You have your apps up here on the right. Say you have some specific applications that you want to get access to on-prem and private infrastructure, but you also want to obfuscate and also provide a secure route for your cloud traffic. So prying eyes on the internet can't see that your device is trying to connect to Entra or Salesforce in this example. So what happens is device management pushes down a relay and an ACME config. The same ACME config we saw before with a certificate, all that applies as that will be used as the client certificate. But we also configure the host names that we want to have routed through this service. That profile activates on the device a device level relay that sends within the configuration anything that matches those host names to a relay of your definition. Now, Jamf provides a network relay service, but anyone or any vendor can create a network relay proxy that uses what's called the mask protocol for HTTP3 and QUIC to handle that traffic that's coming from the left to the right. Now, once that traffic lands on the proxy, you can do all sorts of things like making sure the device is secure, if the device should have access to a certain thing. In our case, we will egress that traffic in one of two ways, either through an IPsec tunnel directly to your private infrastructure or through some cloud source IP addresses. Now, what that allows you to do is do some really interesting things in the instance of Entra with conditional access to only allow traffic in coming from one of these IPs and to trust the traffic because it's gone through this attested route on the bottom. that you know that if you're coming from those IP addresses, that must be a managed, trusted, attested device coming from Jamf. But also for things like a licensing server, help desk center, where you don't want the user to have to make sure they've set up their VPN correctly and authenticated and it's working. Instead, as soon as that device is managed into MDM, it has the networking route it needs to access the help desk and the licensing server, either in the browser or using any custom TCP or UDP port or protocol. It just gets that network connectivity working so an end user doesn't have to think about it, and they have everything they need so their apps and their support use cases, if it are all there and ready for them. Now, most importantly, like I mentioned, all this coexists with your VPN and other ZTNA solutions. So you can specify those few host names you want to have always on in this device level relay, but then that doesn't require replacing your existing VPN for a lot of your other security or connectivity needs. This is something that can layer in very nicely. And Apple built this very intentionally to allow a relay to be something you evolve to without forcing you to rip out your VPN, which is the enterprise standard today. Now, Apple also provides some really powerful and interesting content filtering capabilities with an on-device content filter. So they're moving into a direction where you're not having to decrypt traffic in the cloud in transit. You actually can do that decryption and inspection on-device in a safe, secure, private, sandboxed environment. They're also providing support for DNS over HTTPS to make sure that there's no unencrypted DNS traffic ever leaving that device, no matter what network it's on. So on the device, this manifests in, again, a native UI. With a relay provisioned, you simply see a relay show up here with a little switch, and that's it. And also in the configuration, you could see, again, the relay config, as well as some of these other filters and proxies that have been configured that, again, gives transparency to the end user that this stuff is there. But as you can see, you can't change any of those switches. They've all been locked on per policy. So that's connectivity. It's performant zero trust networking and filtering in a private, secure by design sort of way. There's native and modern network stack improvements for seamless connectivity to get networking out of the way from end user productivity on a Mac device. And then it's zero touch deployed using device management. Through this whole architecture that Apple's built, you can get all this stuff, whether it's a legacy VPN or a new relay, all configured, all deployed, set up, ready to go for the user through the device management stack. So, as we've covered, Apple has been extending their native secure by design capabilities well beyond just the realm of endpoints and apps and OS updates, well into the scope of identity, networking, and security. Now, we at Jamf, we're doing the same. We're erasing the boundaries of our own product offerings that used to play in these different areas. We're blending that all together so that we could deliver cohesive experiences that blend endpoint management, identity, networking, security. Now, we are redefining these boundaries of device management to embrace these secure by design outcomes with the goal of allowing Macs to truly work their best and allow you to deliver these Macs further into the enterprise. And we're doing that through something we're calling Jamf for Mac. It is our new offering that simply gives you everything you need to unlock secure by design in your enterprise. Now, Jamf for Mac is designed to enable your Macs to fit in, to stand out. Now, we are not going head-to-head with these other vendors that you already have in there. Instead, Jamf for Mac enables you to deliver and enable these different tool sets in an Apple-best sort of way, in a way that allows you to make sure that your Macs are working great using these existing vendors and helping Macs shine well within your security team's environment. But with Jamf for Mac, you're also getting the entire Jamf platform to fill the gaps that are left by these multi-platform tools. Some of the things we talked about today are perfect examples of that. But we tie these things together to make sure that we're able to make these devices fulfill the requirements that are required for an enterprise-grade standpoint or enterprise-grade endpoint. Okay, well, told you it'd be a lot. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining. We're going to move on to Q&A. Feel free to type those up and have yourself a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.